Hi all, welcome to our first course together, the introduction for the Wired This Way virtual curriculum. My name is Jessica and I am so pleased to have you join me for this journey into the complexity of creators. To set the stage for what we can expect from today's course, today will be a little bit more of me talking, a little bit less of our creative work together. It'll be a little bit more of the scientific exploration rather than the philosophical exploration. But the student in me feels quite strongly that it's important for us to develop this shared baseline of knowledge and vocabulary so that as we begin to embark on this really rich, meaty journey into the depths of the creator, that we're operating from the same set of principles and same general fluency. So with no further ado, let's get started. So a few years ago, I was working in venture capital and startups, and my job was to meet with thousands of creators. And when I use the term creator, which I prefer to the word entrepreneur, to be honest, what I mean by that is anybody who turns nothing into something for a living. They are the individuals who use themselves as the conduits for creation. They allow themselves to be the vessels through which creation is incepted and carried out in the world. So creators being entrepreneurs, investors, innovation executives, creatives, anybody who really is astute in the art of creative alchemy. And one of the first things I became aware of when I entered the VC ecosystem was this dooming, damning, clickbaity headline I kept seeing among articles published by the media. Things like, there's an epidemic or a plague. There's a crisis of mental health issues, of burnout, of stress-related illness, of freakouts and meltdowns and dark nights of the souls among creators. And given my background in psychology and neuroscience, I got very curious about what they were talking about. And so as I did my research, I found that indeed, creators and entrepreneurs do tend to suffer from their fair share of mental health issues, stress-related illness, burnout, even existential stressors, things like crises of meaning and passion and identity. And so I got really curious about what was happening, why this is, and if there really was a crisis or an epidemic, or if the story was a little bit more nuanced and frankly, a little bit more optimistic than the media was sharing. Because when you look at these statistics, which just to orient you to what we're looking at, these are the research rates in the dark blue bars of the prevalence of mental health conditions among entrepreneurs. And this is looking at a lifetime prevalence. So what we see is that there are significantly higher rates of mental health issues in entrepreneurs, which is the column with the E, versus controls, which is the column with the C. So significantly more prevalent rates of mental health issues among entrepreneurs than creators. So for the first bit of our course today, we're going to be talking about what are these kinds of mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. So let's just, and this is going to sound pessimistic for a few minutes while we're just going through all of the details, but I assure you we're going to emerge into sunnier waters pretty soon. So first is mental health struggles. Depression is 2 times higher in entrepreneurs than controls. ADHD is almost 6 times higher. Substance abuse is 3 times higher. And bipolar is an astounding 11 times higher in entrepreneurs than controls. And then there's hypomania, which some psychologists believe that actually all creators and entrepreneurs have hypomania, because the qualities of hypomania are rather essential for the creative process. Things like energy and optimism and sociability that are so common in the hypomanic individual are actually rather mission critical qualities for entrepreneurs and creators. And so I won't spend too much time on this slide because I assume that most of you have a fair understanding of what each of these disorders are. But very briefly, depression is evidenced by low affect and energy, by deficits in motivation and ambition, by feelings of apathy and hopelessness, by that feeling of what's the point, or nothing I can do will make a difference, or unproductive rumination on notions that do not serve the individual. ADHD is characterized by primarily distractibility, by abundant energy, by the inability to sit still and focus, by the inability to complete tasks fully and completely. Although, interestingly, ADHD is a little bit of a little misunderstood, because individuals with ADHD do have the ability to hyper-focus on tasks which deeply intrigue them and deeply excite them. Substance abuse, so pretty clear what substance abuse is, but more generally looking at addictive patterns. So addictive patterns can be evidenced in things like substances, so drugs and alcohol, things like sex or gambling, thrill-seeking. You can even become addicted to something exciting like skydiving or like new venture creation, which is why some researchers refer to the compulsion to start new ventures as entrepreneurship addiction. Bipolar combines the lows of depression with the peaks of mania. So vacillating between feeling rather hopeless, feeling low energy, feeling low affect, and then with the manic periods, which are characterized by incredible bursts of energy, insight, motivation, and occasionally, though not always, with sort of these breaks from reality. And then hypomania, as we talked a little bit earlier, is a little bit less than mania. So individuals with hypomania tend to be a little bit more productive than those who go into full manic episodes. But basically, high energy, ambition, creativity, motivation is what is seen in the hypomanic individual. Next, we have emotional and spiritual distress, and I won't spend too much time on this slide because we will be talking a lot about this in the following courses. But things like imposter syndrome, which is basically the individual creator feeling as though they are unworthy of their successes or that they are surely to be discovered as a fraud. A crisis of meaning, which is essentially that crisis of, what's the point? What is the purpose of my life? Is my work driving me towards my fullest destiny? What if my company fails and then my very source of meaning and purpose is pulled out from under me? And questions of obsessive passion. So the idea that there are two types of passion among creators. There's harmonious passion and obsessive passion. An obsessive passion, which is the tendency to engage with one's work in a very unharmonious way, where one feels anxious and guilty if they're not working. One has an insecure attachment with one's work. One constantly needs to be absorbed with work and feels only fully satisfied and alive if they're working, and works to the neglect of their social relationships and their hobbies and their health and things along those lines. So these are three among many, many, many examples of forms of emotional and spiritual distress among creators. And finally, the third bucket being stress-related illness. So stress-related illness is very common among creators, whether that's issues with sleeping, susceptibility to colds and flus and infections, so evidence of weakened immunity, things like adrenal fatigue, which is a little bit controversial in the literature, exactly what adrenal fatigue is, but basically the body and just being in a state of fight or flight for too long with that adrenaline and that cortisol pumping and surging, even when there is no imminent threat. Things like GI upset are common among creators, so tummy troubles, allergies, intolerances, things of that nature. And then largely as a result of disruptions to hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, we see this hormonal disruption that more anecdotally seems to very often affect female entrepreneurs, affecting things like their menstrual cycle, their skin, their hair. And among men may result in some sexual performance challenges. And existential distress. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. This kind of falls under the spiritual category, but basically crisis of meaning, purpose, and identity. So the individual creator really relying entirely on their work as a means of self-actualization and self-realization. And indeed, creators are more likely than non-entrepreneurs to use their work as a means to self-actualize, which can be a brilliant motivator, but can actually be quite devastating then if there's a disruption or a threat to their company, because a threat to their company becomes a threat to their sense of self and their sense of purpose.